trauma, addiction, hopelessness, despair, desperation. North, east, west, and south, you can find it anywhere, even though you're not looking for it. If you live in the city of Toronto, then it's no secret that the epidemic of homelessness has become increasingly unprecedented, particularly over the past decade. Not that the city of Toronto hasn't always been home to a population of unhoused citizens. However, to suggest that the issue has simply intensified would be a massive understatement. With the gap between the wealthy and impoverished being larger than ever and continuing to grow, and the vast majority of the populace being nothing more than a paycheck away from a similar fate, the situation is quickly reaching unsustainable levels. And yet still it persists, seemingly unaddressed in any meaningful fashion. And it's costing Canadian taxpayers a whopping $7 billion per year. Hi, my name is Yarlos, and I'm making a documentary on the homelessness crisis here in the city of Toronto. Follow me as I travel across the city talking to those on the front lines about their perspectives concerning the growing epidemic of homelessness here in Canada's most populous city. You feel the government is doing enough to address the issue of homelessness in the city?
No, not really whatsoever. They more care for the new people coming to the country and giving them housing, jobs, higher income, even on Ontario Works. I've been cut off of Ontario Works because someone told them I was making money when I'm homeless. And I've had other people tell me that they get like $3,000 and they just came and they're getting it from Ontario Works. Yet homeless, you get $340 a month.
Can you tell me a little bit about what your day-to-day life is like out here, like your day-to-day existence?
I have to ask people to help me with getting food, clothing, blankets, everything. I'm right now sleeping in a tent.
Okay, and do you feel like, are you a user by any chance?
No, I'm actually over 8 years clean.
That's excellent, congratulations, and I like to hear that kind of stuff because it kind of breaks the stigma where they think, everybody that's out here on the streets is out here because of drugs. I believe you look clean, I can see it in your eyes. So what do you think, if anything, that the government can or should do to help people in your situation ultimately climb out of it?
To be honest, get more affordable housing, stop with bringing other people from other countries and prioritizing them, prioritize the people that were born in this country first before helping everyone else out.
So my conversation with Matthew has me wondering how many more are out here that are exactly like him. He's young, intelligent, polite, well-spoken, and definitely sober, but like many others, can't seem to catch a break because of today's economy. This paradox only served to make me even more determined to get some answers as to why this is happening in our city. Why are these vulnerable yet otherwise capable young men able to slip through the cracks of our system? A system that is touted as an international example of what a prosperous, developed nation where none are left behind should look like. Could it be that we have taken our status in the first world as a so-called developed nation for granted? Is there enough to go around? As stated earlier in this video, the issue of homelessness comes with a $7 billion annual cost to the Canadian taxpayer. But hold on a second. Since 2022, Canada has given $4.5 billion in military assistance to the Ukraine. Not to mention that between 2014 and 2021, Canada gave the Ukraine more than $692 million in development and humanitarian assistance. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and find this information on the Government of Canada's own website. $692 million in development and humanitarian assistance. Yet when I look around the city of Toronto and see young men like Matthew, who are undoubtedly the victims of the most egregious circumstances, I can't help but ask myself where there could possibly be any more necessity or urgency for humanitarian assistance than right here on our own streets. So I wanted to talk to a few more people and get their perspectives about how this crisis directly impacts them
and their day-to-day lives.
You're in housing, you have no money, and so we end up selling some weed or whatever, and put it up for years, and they keep teaching us trades, right? And then they tell us we have a criminal record, so we can't get a regular job.
What do you think the government should do to help people who are in your circumstances?
I personally think they should be teaching kids trades, man. I spent half my life in jail beside murderers, you know what I'm saying? Just because I had to sell drugs because I grew up in government housing.
Right.
Because I never had money when I was growing up. We're products of our environments, you know what I mean? Like, I had to make money to help my mom, whatever, you know what I mean? And there's child molesters getting off on fucking charges, all these rich motherfuckers, you know what I'm saying? I had to just I was growing up with nothing, so I had to eat, you know what I'm saying? And now that they said I have a criminal record.
So does that prevent you from doing anything?
Can't even work at McDonald's.
Yeah. So is there any resources? Do you have trouble finding resources to help you?
There's not even shelters. The shelters are all full, they say.
How are the cops out here? Do they give you guys a lot of trouble?
They're not as bad as they used to be, right? But, yeah, they still do give us trouble, you know what I mean? They still do. But we're not allowed to sleep on the bench. What the fuck are we supposed to do?
So what do you guys just stay out here all night? All the time?
Basically, yeah, but we're not allowed to. They'll tell us we're loitering if they want to be assholes. They tell us to move, but there's no shelter. Right? The shelters they give out to the immigrants. And the immigrants have more money than we do.
Yeah. So, you guys are getting blood infections from the fentanyl they're putting on the streets?
Yeah. From the cuts that they're doing. The cutting agent. And it's all made from the government. You know what I mean? Fentanyl is made by the government. And now they have a tranquilizer. Oh, the fucking Narcan's not even working. I got 18 staples in my head because I walked into a moving car.
So, how much of a role do you think homelessness plays in your circumstances?
I think the government is making us homeless so they can kill us. The 1% of the population that doesn't abide by the taxes or whatever just because of our circumstances, they want to get rid of us. They want to get rid of the poor.
Hearing his take on the government's role in facilitating the fentanyl crisis bombarding our communities and taking the lives of so many piqued my curiosity and made me want to dig a little bit deeper to find out exactly how and where homelessness and substance addiction overlap one another and exactly where they intersect. I wanted to know if there was any truth in these allegations or if it was just another conspiracy theory. So I headed to Moss Park, not far from Toronto's notorious Regent Park, to get some answers.
How many empty condos are there in Toronto that we could use for homelessness? Guess what? There is no empty condos. Think about what I'm trying to tell you. Where do these people come from? They have the money and those condos are filled right away. They are filled right away. Here we have immigration with India, the largest democratic country in the world, here. So guess what? Your own democracy is going to bring you down. Because when they become the majority and they're voting, what's going to happen to Canada? So people need to remember what Canada is, what it stands for. The thing is, again, this one's trying to tell you, there's so much ins and outs to this homelessness. It's like a social problem. It's an economic problem. My solution also, my number 2 solution is this. Okay, you have unemployment, right? You have social security, such and that, right? Guess what? Every Canadian has a right to a home. So why doesn't the government put together a fund, right? And you start off like everything comes off your paycheck, or you're being like an annuity, you know, or like a bond, right? A bond that was in 10 years and then 7. So why from the day that you're born, right? They want to give you the child tax benefit, this and that, the GST checks and all that stuff. Why don't they put something aside that by the time you're 18, you have money to have a home?
So how much of a role does fentanyl play in all this?
So the interesting thing about fentanyl is that if you see somebody on the street before and you're sleeping, do not disturb. Never touch anybody when they're sleeping. That's their sleep time. Also, people, since they have to be on guard, might wake up and kick off your head. There's actually, you know, people that act like that. I've seen people wake up and they're flying around on kicks.
So what if you're a bystander and you walk by and you feel like maybe that person might be like overdosing?
Well, that's the point I was trying to make. So back in the day, rules do not touch. Now the rule is you have to check that person. So I think that even people in the streets, they don't realize what they're really doing to themselves and what's really going on. What the people are getting on the street is not fentanyl. It's a byproduct of fentanyl.
I also wanted to address something. I wanted to ask you another question. That I was up at by Dundas Square the other day, and I was speaking to some guys, and they were telling me that there's fentanyl on the street that's making them sick, and it's
What do you expect? Well, it's a dog world. Think about it. Okay, we should have right like
he's implying that the government is purposely putting bad fentanyl on the street that's making people sick.
Well,
he also says that the Narcan isn't working anymore.
Well, the reason why the Narcan is not working because of what you call it again, benzo. So the benzos, they put it in the people put tranquilizers in the fentanyl. They try to mix it, they try to expand. And where did the fentanyl addiction come from? From the big pharmaceutical companies that flooded the markets of opiates. So is it simple? No, it's quite elaborate. But educate yourself on what's really going on, and you can see.
So what do you think is the root of the problem?
So what happens is that you get the conservative party, they want to cut a shape, good. They do economics, they're getting tough to cut here, but then they ignore the environment, they ignore poor people. Then you have the liberals come in, and then they start thieving the money, and they start giving money to poor certain areas that don't need the money. Like, for example, St. Stephen's is one of the best droppers, best programs. It's the cleanliness. Where? St. Stephen's, St. Augustine call it. Now, they get funded by the United Way. But there have been times where St. Stephen's is the worst place because of the staff. So you're in a shelter, you lose your bed, right? And then you have like 2 days to get your stuff. Guess what? Brand new stuff you can have in a box. I mean, think about it. You got to be in a shelter. You go to Megan, you got to get out by 7 a.m. If you don't take that ticket, then that is a meal ticket, you don't even have to come back. If you didn't take that ticket, all of a sudden you're out of the system. But you just walk out of the bed. Then later on, when you go back in, you're like, oh, no, you lost your bed. How did I lose my bed? Because you didn't wake up and go take that ticket. Now, if you're in the streets and you need to sleep and you need to rejuvenate, why would you want to be, how could you wake up a guy at 6, 7 a.m.? You can't. They don't know how much abuse the staff does. I see somebody with a broken arm. Trust me on this one. And this is a reality that most of these people that are supposed to be your mental health worker are more mental than the people. I'm telling you. So they sit there and they abuse the system, and people don't realize, and they think, oh no, it must be the client's fault. It's not the client's fault.
With our government as of late seemingly prioritizing the giving away of billions of dollars in foreign aid for the maintenance of never-ending wars, it's entirely logical that the average unhoused Canadian would feel like the government has deliberately and willfully allowed them to fall by the wayside while simultaneously adopting an attitude of perpetual nonchalance. As if poverty and destitution should simply be par for the course in a nation that ranked 4th in the updated U.S. News Country rankings for 2024, achieving an overall index score of 94.1 out of 100. The score is based on quality of life, entrepreneurship, social purpose, and agility. Furthermore, in 2023, Canada was ranked 2nd best country in the world by Time Out based on the same factors. But from what I can see, the level of economic violence being waged against unhoused individuals here in the city of Toronto is nothing short of a complete and utter contradiction of this by every metric. So, are these circumstances just a simple fact of life? Just an unfortunate yet natural progression of life under a free market economy? Or are the circumstances surrounding the epidemic of homelessness the result of something far more nefarious?
What's your name?
My name's Corey.
Corey. All right. So you said you just came out of treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where is that around?
Around the corner.
Okay.
River Light.
Do you find that the government is doing enough to help people in your situation?
I personally don't think so, because you look around, you see a lot of people on the streets and all that. For me, I had to make money selling drugs and doing what I needed to do.
And so I'm assuming you had struggle with substance abuse because you're coming from treatment, right?
Yeah.
So how's that impacted your life?
Well, that made me lose everything. My family, my kids, everything. So, yeah.
Anything you want to say to the government if they're watching?
You should help your own people out before helping other people out.
After talking to Corey, I decided to head a little further west to Dufferin Grove Park, located just south of Bloor Street on Dufferin. This is a public park, and yet an entire community of unhoused people currently live in tents here, fully exposed to the elements without any respite from the sub-zero winter weather. It's not at all uncommon for temperatures to dip below freezing daily and even reach lows exceeding minus 20 degrees. According to Toronto.ca, the city's official website, between 2021 and 2022, a combined 411 unhoused people died due to exposure here in Toronto. And it's suggested that this number is likely underreported due to the fact that the city mainly relies on civilian reports in order to compile their data. Despite knowing what to expect, when I arrived at Dufferin Grove, I still found myself slightly taken aback. The feeling was as visceral as the frost biting through the air, but oddly enough, I could also feel the warmth of community here.
How does it impact you to see this on a day-to-day basis?
On one hand, I feel bad for, kids who are 5 years old, 6 years old now, because they can't really do that in the same way. But at the same time, like, these people, they need to go somewhere, They need to be able to live somewhere, because they're not, obviously, this isn't anyone's first choice to live in a tent in a public park. This is their last choice, and I think, we gotta remember that.
Remember, like, a couple years ago when the police kicked out all those people out of Alexander Park and
Yeah.
like some other parks? Yeah, that was like I remember like watching it happen. I was like, yeah, that's just like insane. People have nowhere else to go.
This obviously shouldn't be like the long-term solution.
But at least here they can build a community. They like
It is a very close knit.
yeah, like they all know each other.
When you guys are walking around from day to day, do you guys see any open-air drug use? Like,
Yeah,
is it common?
not like every day, but I've seen more than a few examples.
So do you guys feel that the government is doing enough to address this issue?
Absolutely not.
Like safe injection sites. Like it shows that they don't actually care.
Government ain't doing shit. The pretenders doing shit. They do shit for some people, right? What are you gonna do though, right? We're all living in tents right now. A lot of us here are people that lost their jobs. I've told so many people that come here already, man, the same shit.
How are you guys gonna survive the winter out here, man?
Trying to get into a shelter, but I don't know. It's
Trying to get something,
what
right?
it is. It's
Some people are on waiting lists. Some people, don't want to leave. There's some people that,
A waiting list for a shelter.
waiting list for a shelter, or even
central intake. They reject about 265 people that they.
and that's central
might be-
intake. Imagine that. That's where they send
There's
everybody
there's
to
no
go in the
shelter
beginning,
space.
right? Go here.
Oh, okay. Those are the grounds that they reject them on. There's no space.
There's no space.
Okay.
And it's a combination of things. I wasn't when I was in the shelter, starting from January of 2024, going through April, May. A lot of you immigrants in the shelter. People that came here refugee status. Not their fault, but the government's fault. Because it's really in that regard, that's the federal government's responsibility. They shouldn't be unloading that at the seams.
So how do you feel? I had actually somebody else that I was speaking to, and he said that we're dealing with India, which is the largest democratic country in the world, and that's
Yes.
where we are importing our immigration from.
Yeah.
What's your input on that?
You know what? We need. I have no problem with immigration. We become complacent in our own society. Cause a lot of problems. The fault is not the immigrants, but the government. The numbers don't seem to make sense. There's a housing crisis. They knew that there was a housing crisis in this country, yet they bring in all these immigrants. Of course, there's going to be abuse in the system. That always happens. What are you going to do? But the numbers that they let in just don't make no sense. And then I hear people working in the construction industry, people from Mexico that are making a third of what a unionized worker would be. And that's wrong too. But we need it, right? I mean, Canada's got 40 million people now.
Just now, yeah.
And it's like, whoa. I mean, we're a very wealthy country.
I really hope things get better for you guys. This is the whole purpose behind this documentary, trying to bring some real awareness to this, because this is unsustainable.
It's and food and everything. It's gone out of hand. And pre-COVID and post-COVID is like day and night, completely day and night. Can't believe how much things have changed. 5 or 6 years. I mean, it was already spiraling out of control. It's gone. It's gone. It's just gone.
How did you end up out here though, downtown? Because you used to live in Scarborough.
From shelter to shelter, you know, living on the streets, and just living with violence every day.
You get a lot of violence in the shelter and drugs and stuff?
No, it's just, you know, it's like a paranoid environment. I mean to say like claustrophobia or something, you know, the type of epilepsy I suffer from. Kind of hard to deal with, just living around in space all the time. I have to go somewhere, be somewhere, do something, get something in me, you know, like put you some extra going, you know. You could have upgraded me a little.
Absolutely, brother. I got you, man. So what, do you still talk to anybody from Scarborough? No way. So are you in a shelter right now? Or are you on the street? God bless you, Jesus. I hope that you find your way out here, man. The following day, I decided to go check up on Matthew as well as follow up with a few more questions in order to gain a wider perspective of his life and circumstances. I hoped to decipher a deeper understanding of the spiral that led him to this predicament. I wanted to know his story. Matthew, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your life, if you don't mind sharing.
So when I first became homeless, it was because I was living with my grandma because stuff that happened with my father. She ended up on fentanyl patches for her spinal issues, and it ate her spinal cord. She ended up in hospital, and then the building kicked me out because I was underage. Met my ex-fiance when I was 24. And 2 years later, she cheated on me, kicked me out.
And how old are you now?
27. I just turned 27 July 17th.
Okay, so you're a young guy. So when you're out here on the streets, do you guys have any problems with the police? Like over in your encampment or you're staying in your tent? Do they give you guys problems or are they generally okay?
I stay by myself and it's very quiet. I've actually had 2 officers while over there give me like $5 to go get a warm drink.
Have you had any experience with the shelter system while you're out here?
I have, but it's never been good. I've had stuff stolen by the staff and other people in the shelters.
You would rather stay out here than be in the shelter?
Yeah, they don't check for drugs, weapons, and anything. I've been robbed at knife point in there. I've had staff come in while sleeping, steal my phone. I've only really found one place that actually helps, which is Yonge Street Mission. And with that, I'm on a housing list, YMCAs. They're one of the best people to go to if you need a shower because they'll be like, oh, okay, do you have a membership? You're like, no, I'm homeless, I just need a shower. They'll give you a towel, tell you where the shower is, let you in.
Do you see a lot of violence out here?
There's been some things that I've seen out here.
And if you could do anything with your life, like if you were tomorrow, just snap your fingers, and you could be out of this situation, what would you do with your life?
Be a mechanic.
What's your favorite car?
1969 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500 engine swapped out for a 469 engine with a Whipple supercharger and 2 twin turbos.
Amazing. Again, is there anything that you would like to say to the government of Ontario and to the federal government if they should see this video?
Help out the country. We need it.
I know what some of you are probably thinking. Some of you are probably wondering, how does this happen? You're probably wondering how people end up this far gone and where it all starts. I think we all find ourselves wondering that from time to time. And as they say, everything does indeed have a beginning, and we're better than Scarborough in order to gain some perspective on those beginnings. All right, John, tell me a little bit about your life, your background.
I grew up in Scarborough, Kennedy and Eglinton, up until I was 14. And then I moved out in Whitby with my mom. She bought a house out there and my stepdad. I stayed out there until I was about 15 because I got into a little bit of trouble with the schooling system out there. And then I got fully expelled from the Ontario school systems because I brought a fake pistol to school. And so
How old were you when that happened?
15.
Okay.
So I moved back in Scarborough with my dad, and that's probably when I got into the drugs.
Were your parents good to you and stuff like that?
My parents were good to me. They weren't very educated. I don't feel like I got very many life lessons. Like, my parents loved me and everything. I know that for sure because I spent 2 years, almost 2.5 years in jail, 26 months. And my mom, she visited me almost every single day or every single week.
What kind of drugs did you get into?
Well, I started smoking weed at a really young age before that. Perks at first.
Okay.
Yeah. And it just was more of a recreational thing at first. I didn't realize the addiction because I didn't have enough money to make it an addiction, you know what I mean? Well, I was about 19, and that's when my grandma died. Yeah, so then I got into more harder drugs because perks didn't do it, and they were more expensive anyways. So I got into heroin. I never touched any needles, but yeah, at first I started sniffing it, and then just your nose can't take it after a while, so I started smoking it.
How old were you when you got into heroin?
Around 19, 20.
How did that impact your life?
I had a 10-year addiction. So throughout that time, I was basically like not a productive member of society at all, right? I was most of the time hustling or fucking going through withdrawal, so I was on Ontario Works welfare.
Is that how you became homeless? Was because of drugs?
Yeah, because after a while you burn your bridges, right?
Yeah.
Because people, they lose faith in you. The more you give them reason to. I was in the shelter system for a while.
How was that like?
The youth shelter system is a hell of a lot more comfortable. When I was in the youth shelter system, you're allowed to go in a lot of those up until you're 24. It's usually 16 to 24, those shelters are. The adult shelters, they're horrible, man.
A lot of violence?
Violence, drugs. If you're trying to get clean and you're on the streets and you got to be in a shelter, it's definitely not the place, man.
It's kind of like a cycle that kind of perpetuates itself. So you want to get clean, you want to get into a shelter. You go to a shelter, there's more drugs there, more violence.
Yeah, 100%.
When you were on the street and you were homeless, did you find it easy to access resources?
It all depends, too. Depends on the time of year, too. Winter time is the worst. They're usually always booked up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, winter time is definitely the worst. If it wasn't winter time, to be honest with you, the shelter system is so fucked up and dirty and just all the drugs that I would rather find someplace safe that I knew that I could sleep. Yeah. And I'd rather be there instead. I found it safer.
And
right?
Do you think that the government does enough to help people that find themselves in those circumstances?
Absolutely not. No. No.
Elaborate on that. Like, did you try to reach out for help and couldn't get help? Like you said, you had a 10-year addiction, right? So
yeah.
You battled for a while. So
I didn't always ask for help though, right? But even when you do, like, there's so many people asking for it and not enough resources. The waiting lists are crazy, and it's just hard to get to where you want to go. And by the time you could be up on the waiting list, like, you could have fucked up your life even more by then, and you're not even ready, you know what I mean? So
when you were in prison, did you try to get resources in there?
The provincial system, there's barely any resources, any programs, right?
Better now? You doing much better now?
Absolutely, man. I mean, I'm not exactly where I want to be, but every day is a learning experience. And
what's your message to the youth out there nowadays? Because I just want to let you know, here in the city of Toronto, seniors and youth comprise 10% of the unhoused population. So if there's any youth out there that are in these circumstances, whether it be they're addicted to drugs or unhoused or maybe both, what is your message to them?
There's one quick thing I could say. It's don't let your past determine your future.
The common denominator between everyone I speak to is their sentiments concerning the lack of action in taking effective measures to combat this problem. I'm unfortunately inclined to agree, and it seems that whenever it is addressed, it's always from a heavy-handed, militarized standpoint devoid of any and all compassion. The more I search for answers, the more questions I end up with. Like, how can they create the circumstances for these issues to run rampant within our society and then turn around and criminalize the inevitable outcome? Or how can they strip people of their dignity and yet expect that their decency will remain intact? Even the very resources and mechanisms that are set up to supposedly help these individuals seem to do nothing more than aid in keeping them trapped in this ruthless cycle through a never-ending sea of bureaucracy and red tape. One thing is as certain as it is indisputable. Our social system is past broken.
For the past few years, municipalities across Ontario have faced a legal limit, trying to evict encampments without violating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
The city cannot clear them unless there are reasonable and appropriate alternatives where people can go. But once those alternatives are there, then it would be okay to clear encampments.
The Ford government is now looking at creating more of those alternatives, offering municipalities additional funding for more shelter spaces, in effect giving the cities the reason to evict. The province is set to table new legislation designed to target encampments, prohibiting the use of illicit drugs in public with new enforcement for police, enhanced penalties for repeat offenders, and accountability measures to ensure new shelter beds support the removal of encampments. While the details of the law are unclear, mayors are already lining up to deploy it. But what if the new law is challenged in court? Premier Ford has indicated he's willing to use the notwithstanding clause to override Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees life, liberty, and security of the person.
If we don't see the tangible benefits of the funding that we're providing and of the additional powers that we were providing next week, then we won't hesitate to take further steps.
Critics say the government is late to respond to a growing crisis.
Hold up. Invoke the notwithstanding clause in order to override the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? When did the right to life, liberty, and the security of one's person become privately owned commodities that can be given and taken away from us at one man's behest? The right to life, liberty, and security are inalienable rights bestowed upon each and every one of us by our Creator. And just what is behind Doug Ford's sudden adamance to offload the epidemic of homelessness and addiction to the municipal level? And is it any coincidence that his latest political blunder just so happens to align perfectly with Canada's imminent joint hosting of the 2026 FIFA World Cup alongside Mexico and the United States? After all, these measures would take some time to begin showing the tangible benefits that Ford and his government are so shamelessly and unscrupulously aiming to achieve. All right, Matthew, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
Have you seen the news in the last 24 hours? Have you watched the news at all?
No.
Doug Ford now is going to start offering money to the municipalities to build shelter spaces because, according to the Ontario Human Rights Code, it's illegal for them to remove you guys from the encampments if there's no other reasonable alternative.
Yeah.
Nowhere else to put you. Well, now he's giving the city the reason that they need to evict you guys from these encampments. What do you think of that?
I mean, if it's just the shelters, it's not going to do a damn thing. No one's going to want to go to the shelters. They're going to end up closing down because of not enough funds.
If the police were to come and remove you from the encampment, you had to leave, what would you then do?
I'd just go to a forest, to be honest. I'm not going to trust that shelter system. I've had phones stolen, clothes stolen.
The provincial, the municipal, the federal government, if they happen to watch this video, is there anything you want to say, Will?
Do stuff to actually help. Stop fucking just taking us as second place people. Still, your citizens were born, raised, and the immigrants / what you guys call refugees. Instead of going for them, prioritize your own country.
Now, boys, what have you learned?
When I set out to make this video, I honestly thought it would be pretty cut and dry. I mean, superficially it seemed the issue of homelessness if none other would be. But I've learned that it's anything but. I've learned that there's a multitude of factors placing the most vulnerable members of our society within the crosshairs of poverty, and worse, there are even more factors that compound and aggravate the hardship of those who actually do end up falling victim to said circumstances. It's a vicious vortex of economic violence and suffering ostensibly running on a loop. These citizens are victims of a system that promises prosperity but only to a select few and certainly not to Canadians. The reality is, our government's pockets are deep enough to all but eradicate this problem, and yet they simply choose not to. We give billions in foreign aid. Yet when people like Matthew attempt to reach out from within the prison of their circumstances, the government's pockets always happen to be just shallow of the margins required in order to provide them legitimate relief. In fact, the only thing colder than the winters they suffer through is the indifference they're met with by those whose duty and obligation it is to ensure that Canadians like them don't slip through the cracks. This isn't some banana republic. Canada is a member of the G7, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, consistently ranked in the top 5 as the best nation in the world to live in. And though some of these people are in fact literally homeless, I feel referring to them as such obscures the reality of the situation. One could make the argument that a much more accurate descriptor of their collective circumstances would be to refer to them as internally displaced. These people are trapped in an economic gulag. The current state of affairs on our streets and in our communities is not only unsustainable, it's the antithesis and precise opposite of what a so-called first world society should look like. And our government couldn't make it any more clear that addressing these problems just isn't a priority. That Canadians just aren't a priority. Their complicity in the suffering of these individuals transgresses the limits of decency, and our own attitudes of apathy, indifference, and contempt towards them transgress the limits of morality. These circumstances are not a natural or inevitable outcome of life in a free society, they're a corruption of it. A nation cannot be world-class whilst lacking a robust, efficient housing system adjacent to a comprehensive and functional social safety net for those in crisis. And I fail to see any evidence of such resources being made widely available to those in need of them. A world-class nation doesn't watch the very fabric of their society crumble while turning a blind eye. Considering all of the aforementioned makes Canada's hosting of the 2026 FIFA World Cup in the midst of its worst crisis to date seem all the more morally egregious. We need to get our priorities in order. Canada is a failed society. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.